So all of the commissions that looked into these race-based riots, whether it was the Christopher Commission or the one that came out of Watts or just the U.S. Civil Rights um, commissions, have found that there are several root causes for this kind of uprising. They are excessive force by police officers, poverty and economic justice issues, education and opportunity, housing segregation, and then larger political issues. In this video, we'll be covering the first two of these, excessive force and poverty and economic justice, and in a later video, we'll be covering the others. So, excessive force is an undefined legal concept. And what we have are use of force guidelines in police departments. And so excessive force is in a way, it's in the eye of the beholder, and they're very, very hard cases to prosecute because the guidelines are set up in they're guidelines, not laws, and things like that. There have been some moves in California legislature recently to actually codify some of these definitions, but right now and historically we haven't had that. California has a 37% higher deadly police incidents than average. And the one of the issues is the mix of police versus the population. And if you're at all interested, you can go to that link and find just how the police demographics are similar or different, similar to or different than the general population. And what we find is that the LA Police Department has become more diverse over time. It used to be almost entirely white in a community that was 40 or 50% non-white. Now it's a better, although not perfectly represented mix. There have been some management issues with the Los Angeles Police Department itself. And one of the things that has happened is that over time, the police union has negotiated a situation that leaves they're basically the only bureaucracy in LA that where the city council does not directly have say over the bureaucracy. The city council does appoint the police chief, but has to consult with the police commission in order to do so. The police chief reports not to the city council, but to the police commission. All police then report to the police chief. The police commission is appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the council. And it ends up with a situation where the political leadership, the elected leaders, have very little control over what happens in the police department. It's kind of indirect through an appointed police commission, and that's led to some real issues in California. But another thing that has happened is that technology has changed policing. Like I mentioned with the Rodney King riots, one of the things that came up in that is that somebody had a very early camcorder on them and recorded the whole thing. These days, everybody has a video recorder in their pocket, and so anytime any kind of policing issues happen, there are generally people there to catch it. As a result, police have been asked to wear body cams. And in many ways, this has improved policing because the police know that they're always on or always supposed to be on. And in another way, it has, so it may or may not have changed their behavior towards the people they're interacting with, but it's also given them real credible claims of defenses against accusation of police brutality. There are other kinds of things that are happening, and we're just sort of on the cusp of integrating into policing. The first is facial recognition software, and there is a lot of debate about how this should be used, who should have access to facial recognition software, etc. In China, for instance, they have really advanced facial recognition software and policy to go along with that software. So if you're in any kind of civil uprising in China, you have a situation where that could impact your ability to get on a train or fly or get a job or get an apartment in the future. We are not at that kind of dystopian stage, but we're just now beginning to integrate facial recognition software into public life. In fact, there was an article in the Los Angeles Times the other day about facial recognition being used in public high schools, and what the long-term consequences of that, of like basically every child in America being in a national, their face being in a national database. Another kind of thing that has come up lately is artificial intelligence. And one of the things about artificial intelligence is that we can build in biases to the system um, that we may actually not be all that conscious of, but down the road, these kinds of things are very hard to undo. Once they get built into the system, they're very, very hard to unwind. As you know, you build a program based on some faulty or outdated social beliefs, and then another layer of software is built on that, and then another layer of software is built on that, and by the time you're 20 layers of software deep, it's really hard to modify the assumptions that were baked into the original program. And so as we start to think about computer technology going forward, we need to understand that these have social justice implications, and they have social justice implications 20 years from now. And so one of the things that we're looking at in terms of like the post bail situation, where either say you get out on your own recognizance or you don't get out, is that are there assumptions being built into that that are by their very nature discriminatory. Um, so in talking about release, we don't just look at the crime that was committed. We look at the person's social circumstances. We look at whether they hold a full-time job. We look at past criminal charges. We look at education level and family commitments and things like that. And the assumptions we're building into that may be done in such a way that um, prejudices the artificial intelligence against certain demographic groups. And so it's a very important thing to look at. In general, we need to look at poverty and economic justice. We do know that overall income inequality is a major issue in livability, in terms of crime and things like that. In cities, we tend to have a patchwork of affluence and disadvantage. That there are very, very wealthy areas of cities. There are areas of cities where you could conceivably pay $10 million for an apartment, and areas of the same city where you have people who are making minimum wage and less. The schools, shopping, and job opportunities can differ within a city. If you think about someplace like some of the poorer areas like Baldwin Park, and the richer areas like the San Fernando Valley, and the kind of opportunities that exist for young people, young adults, and people in middle age are very, very different in those two kinds of areas. In California, there are we can break down poverty by race. Latinos, 26% of Latinos are in poverty, 19% of Blacks are in poverty, 17% of Asians are in poverty, and 13% of whites are in poverty. And so we do know that there's a racial component to that. And almost 80% of California's poor households have at least one working adult. So this is not a situation where we have a bunch of people sitting around on welfare who are poor, who are committing crimes and things like that. A lot of those stereotypes are just wrong. Where does all this fit into the crisis of the cities is that we have real problems with poverty. We have real problems with crime and with criminal enforcement, and that lead to kind of a tinderbox situation.